The Best of Our Knowledge explores topics on learning, education, and research. Coming up, we'll speak with one of a handful of winners of this year's Dan David Prize, and we'll speak with school administrators in New York about the state's new ban on cell phones in schools. I'm Lucas Willard, host of The Best of Our Knowledge. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. Our guest today is Mackenzie Cooley, a history professor at Hamilton College. Cooley was awarded the world's largest history prize. Cooley is one of 9 winners to receive this year's Dan David Prize. She's studying what's referred to as bioprospecting, or man's search for natural resources for human benefit, and its impacts on the earth. A scholar of modern Italy, Spain, and the Spanish Empire, Cooley spoke with me remotely from Oaxaca, Mexico.
Bioprospecting is broadly the ways in which we as humans harness powers from nature, right? So we turn to looking at particular plants for their medicinal components and their medicinal powers. But it's also this way in which we have a tendency to look at the natural world and see what humans can make of it. The term bioprospecting comes from the idea of prospecting for gold, going out into the river and shaking your pan until you can find the gold. And really, we often saw that type of prospecting come along with a kind of colonial mentality. And likewise, bioprospecting is something that comes with a colonial mentality too, right? But a lot of Western companies look to the world's natural resources and think about, well, how can we make this sea sponge with particular chemical properties useful for human medicine? And so it's this really intentional, extractive approach to the natural world.
How does bioprospecting differ from how indigenous cultures find and use materials in medicines, for food, for other uses? What's the difference there?
So people, as people live, they use nature, right? And that's true of Aboriginal Australians, and that's true of the Zapotec people who have communities here in Oaxaca, from which I'm kind of taking this call. And it's absolutely right that these communities use plants and animals and minerals in order to heal themselves or in order to make particular goods. But what they tend to do is approach this extraction from the environment with an eye toward reciprocity. You give something in return, you're attentive to a cycle, right, in which you can't remove a particular type of insect every time of year. Instead, that's something that has to be done in June or in September. And instead, when you see the coming of European colonists from the early modern period, which is broadly this period from 1300 to 1800, there's this real commitment to systems that take all of those natural powers out from the living world and does so kind of systematically and often to the ruination of those landscapes.
And speaking of the history of colonization in the Americas, where do you see that being then utilized in European societies? And are there reflections of species or something that then was adapted into European culture? Are there any particular traces of that in language that we use every day in European language?
Yeah, you bet. So some of our kind of most quintessential goods are indigenous American goods, right? This is the tomato. But in particular, chocolate and tobacco were consumed ritually throughout the Americas. Chocolate really was likened to a life force akin to blood, and would have been consumed for ritual purpose, right? And so too, one would smoke tobacco leaves with a leader, right? And it would be a way of sitting together and coming to some decisions or chatting, right? They were goods that were meant to be consumed in particular ways. Of course, as they became commodified within European history, these goods became detached from those original ritual contexts in which they were used. We no longer think about chocolate as being somehow akin to a life force or akin to blood flowing through our body, right? And tobacco, of course, became a means of lifting up the energy levels or of a whole widespread European and North American population. So a lot of these, in the course of that transmission, a lot of the Columbian exchange natural products lose the worldviews that were attached to them. And one of my favorite examples of this transmission story centers on Francisco Hernandez, this Spanish doctor who went to Mexico to collect all of the plants and animals and minerals that the Spanish government could use for medicine. And when he arrived in Mexico, he realized that there was so much for him to learn. He couldn't manage to squeeze it all into some simple herbal that could then be used in Europe. So when he sent back his notes, nobody really used them. So there are amazing anti-pest medicines like zoyolactic, and there are incredible resins like variations of balsam and copal that actually never make it into the global marketplace. That's not even counting things like the more controversial hallucinogens and psychedelic mushrooms that we know famously today, but were never really included in those circuits of trade, simply because they were too different and Europeans didn't have a place for that difference.
Do you think that by Americans and those in the Western Hemisphere in modern day 21st century times, that there is a lot to learn about the resources that are around us and do require a certain kind of teaching or relearning, if you will, to develop a respect for natural resources? And where does the education and learning about these kinds of resources lead to change?
You bet. So as Indigenous languages are endangered today, right? They are becoming extinct, just like different plants and animals are becoming extinct. And when we lose an Indigenous language, we also lose all of the different what's called plant services or animal services that are tied into that language. So those are verbs and ways of speaking that include medicinal knowledge of what to do with a particular type of leaf and how to make it useful for the human body. So those are fundamentally under threat in our present. And one of the things that we need to do as ethnobotanists with an interest in language is help preserve those resources of knowledge, because otherwise we're going to lose them. I really follow Robin Kimmerer's interest in reciprocal cycles of knowledge. And I think Central New York has a really great tradition of thinking about how we might braid sweetgrass, right? Think about combining European and Western approaches to science and to knowledge in more fruitful ways. Certainly, that has a lot to do with what we can see from natural product in natural product studies, right? So we have these lists of all sorts of plants and animals that have medicinal properties that are growing around us all the time, right? That are covering the kind of hillsides of the Oriskany Valley. And those plants have medicinal components, right? And so I think that one of the things that we really want to do in science and in chemical education is to allow students to become more aware of the natural resources that are surrounding them and to be able to see the steps that have taken those natural products into the kind of synthesized versions that are marketed often by pharmaceutical companies, right? 50% of our drugs that we use have a natural product component that is really central to the molecular efficacy of that drug.
Now, Mackenzie, can you give me an example of of when you're in the field, the kind of research that you are doing. I understand that you're speaking to me from Oaxaca right now, but where does your research take you? And can you give me just sort of a feel for what this actually involves? Because a lot of this knowledge isn't just in a book you can check out at your local library.
No, it sure isn't. So I'm a historian, which means that I focus on texts that are written. For the most part, I'm an early modernist who focuses on manuscript and print books. So wherever I go, I consult local archives and libraries. Here in Oaxaca, I've visited some really astounding collections that have very early books and manuscripts that include details about the natural world that have since kind of been lost or been repurposed as Western science really codified. So I think that archives and libraries are tremendously important, and we those resources are still have a lot to teach us. I also think that wherever I go, it's really important to have conversations with people who are experts, right? So I've had some conversations with people who are working as what's called a curandero or a healer. And they are people who are expert in taking care of members of their community, right? Using these herbs and medicaments. I also visited this incredible stall here in the Oaxaca market that is filled with many of these herbs that I see recorded in these 16th and 17th century documents. So I think it's just really important for historians to do site-based research in which you are seeing the overlay between the documents that have fallen out of mainstream use and the cultures that have grown up around them, right? History is never that far under the surface. You just scratch the cover and you find a well beneath.
Now, I also want to speak about your you being awarded the 2025 Dan David Prize, which is a very prestigious recognition. So congratulations!
Thank
And
you.
there is some prize money that is part of that to support research. How will you be utilizing the award?
Thank you. I am going to be utilizing the award to make possible more scholarship, right? So I have written one book and a couple edited volumes, and this prize really enables me to think about the second, third, and even fourth books that I'll be writing over the next 10 years of my career. It is such a privilege. I've worked very closely with students at Hamilton College in order to enable my scholarship so far. We just have a special issue out on historical pharmacopoeias, which are these lists of medicaments and substances with bodily effect from around the early modern world. And my students have taught me so much. I really believe in running humanities research in a way that resonates with a scientific lab. I think that students can dive into archives and collections around the globe just as I can. So I've had students travel with me to the Canary Islands, to Italy, to Berlin, and work in collections in Latin America as well. And they've found really astounding things that might not have crossed my desk. One student who's now at Yale is working on a project on manchineel, which is the world's most poisonous tree. And it's because he found this incredible and really devastating description of manchineel poisoning in the Hamilton archives. And that's really led him on this incredible research journey to explore poisons throughout the natural environment. And I've learned so much from him. So I hope to continue those types of collaborations as we go forward from here. But Hamilton has been an incredibly supportive environment to conduct this research. And I want to do them proud with the next project too.
Now, of course, this award does come at a time when research funding is being eliminated or pulled back in many places, and there's a larger debate about government's role in supporting academic research. How are you just reflecting on what's going on right now in politics and its ramifications for the kind of work that you do, but also that you see being performed by your students and colleagues?
Yeah. Look, I think that we're seeing a radical shift in the funding landscape. And in some ways, we, as a historian of science, I feel like I have to point out that scholarship has not always been so reliant on the federal government. And so I think that we're entering a moment in which private donors are particularly important. The Dan David Foundation was set up by a man who earned his wealth in photography. He had the photo booth contract for sections of Europe. And then he has endowed this incredible fellowship that it really centers research opportunities and the importance of studying the past. And gosh, I think that we really need to develop these robust kind of donor relations across the humanities to think about how we can do work that both services a public good and perhaps can be kind of recognized by foundations that are outside of the governmental circuit. The Dan David Foundation really saved my research. I was going to be here in Oaxaca on a National Endowment of the Humanities Fellowship, which was funded to go visit different area centers. And that was defunded in emergency measures. So this research would not have been possible without the Dan David Foundation. So I could not be more grateful, and I would encourage those people in the wider world who are interested in history and curious about big questions to think about how they can engage philanthropically in a way that makes possible new discoveries at this moment where the national government is really shifting priorities.
Well, Mackenzie, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about your next steps or what you're working on that we haven't mentioned already?
You bet. So I have this special issue that I developed with my collaborator at Hamilton College, Max Majerick. He's a professor of chemistry. And so we did some work on natural product chemistry and historical study that both involved some lab time and a lot of engagement with rare books. So I would encourage folks to check out the special issue of Historical Pharmacopoeias, which includes a number of student essays that I think are really accessibly written and showcase what we could kind of do within a liberal arts college setting when it comes to big research questions.
Well, Mackenzie Cooley, thank you so much again for taking the time. I appreciate it.
It's really an honor to get to speak with you.
Mackenzie Cooley is a history professor at Hamilton College and is a recipient of the 2025 Dan David Prize. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. Earlier this year, state lawmakers in New York approved a bell-to-bell ban on cell phones in schools. Now, local districts are working to implement the policy by August 1st. WAMC's Jesse Taylor spoke with school district administrators and has this report.
School districts across the state have until August 1st to answer the call. That's when they are required to adopt a local policy on how they plan to implement Governor Kathy Hochul's new ban on cell phones and other internet-connected devices in schools. Teachers and district leaders say the legislation, put into effect as part of the fiscal year 2026 state budget, promises to be a game-changer in classrooms, where students have long been distracted by their devices.
Let's recognize the fact that all across America, a war is being waged for our children's
developing the skills we need because kids are distracted with the skills. Is now the largest state in the nation with a K through 12 bell-to-bell cell phone ban because of all of you.
But in the meantime, districts across New York are in varying states of progress as they work toward implementing the school day ban. Brian Fessler, Chief Advocacy Officer for the New York State School Boards Association, says some districts are struggling to develop their plans on a short timeline.
Until we had a state budget approved and signed into law, school districts were kind of waiting for the details of exactly what that new requirement and new policy would look like and what exactly they would need to do.
The $254 billion state budget was more than a month late this year. The result has led to a bit of a scattershot implementation, with some districts further ahead than others.
We have now a statewide top-down mandate prohibiting the use of these devices. In some cases, that means districts need to reverse the policies that they may have recently adopted.
For instance, Niskayuna Central School District Superintendent Carl Mummenthay says the Schenectady County school system currently has a policy that allows high schoolers to use their devices in between instructional time, such as during lunch, in the hallways between classes, and in study halls. Now, to meet the state standard, Mummenthay says the school will update the policy so that the ban lasts all day, a change he thinks will help students engage more with each other and teachers. But the change may require the district utilize lockable pouches like Yonder bags, or some other kind of physical barrier at first.
We think we're going to need some sort of intermediate step that helps children migrate from cell phone access to cell phone restriction when they're in school.
Shelmont Superintendent Thomas Reardon said his district is taking a different approach.
We're not looking to go to the Yonder pouch route. We're not looking to go to the we're not looking to use a technology to thwart the use. We're looking to go with a very simple system that we're kind of using now and just, amping up a little bit, meaning their phones are away, they're in lockers, they're out of sight.
He says the district, also in Schenectady County, already requires students to put their phones away during instructional time. But that policy will now expand to last all day.
Right now, I guess the only caveat would be that during free time, lunches, study halls, students can have them if that teacher or that group decides it's okay. So this would be, I guess, the change is that theoretically, by this policy, they would be away or out of sight from the time of the start of school to the end of school, including study halls and lunches. So that would be the biggest change.
Schoharie Central School District was one of the first in the state to adopt a bell-to-bell ban, adopting a policy shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic. Natalie McKay, a middle school English teacher, says students in the Mohawk Valley District were having difficulty engaging.
They weren't socially talking to one another. They were having difficulty with, in the classroom even, doing group work or partner work. They had been online for so long.
McKay, who is a member of NYSUT's board of directors and is the president of the local teachers union, said she had to reteach social skills.
Reteach, this is how you have a conversation. This is how you disagree with one another when you're doing your work.
But years after first implementing the full-day cell phone ban, McKay says the school environment throughout the district has totally transformed.
Now you'll walk through our cafeteria and you won't see any students on cell phones. They're talking to one another. They're engaging with one another. I was walking through a couple months ago and students were playing cards. I mean, it's a completely different way of life. It goes back to when I started teaching in the early 2000s.
Reporting for WAMC News, I'm Jesse Taylor.
You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. The Vermont State Legislature recently wrapped its session, but not before passing a sweeping education reform bill. The Green Mountain State is home to a unique public school funding system. But during a time of sky-high rents, a shortage of housing, and property tax increases, the state's Republican governor, Phil Scott, has pushed lawmakers to re-examine how the state funds its schools. WAMC's Pat Bradley has an update.
In January, Republican Governor Phil Scott offered a wide-ranging proposal to reform the state's education system. While the legislature had to extend its session and schedule a veto session to settle on an agreement, lawmakers announced the terms of the reform, and Governor Scott is expected to sign the proposal into law. Cornwall Democrat Peter Conlon, chair of the House Education Committee, outlined the changes to the education reform bill and why they are needed.
We need to change how we do things so that you will receive a high-quality education regardless of the high school you attend. And as our town meeting day school budget votes of the last 2 years showed, we need to move beyond a system where school boards gather in the fall to systematically decide what programs and people to cut in order to produce a budget that will pass muster with voters, making the ability to strategize and plan for the future in substantive ways nearly impossible. School boards and educators need stable, predictable funding. H454 puts us on a path to achieving these goals.
Senator Seth Bongartz, a Democrat and chair of the Senate Education Committee, told the Senate caucus that the conference committee negotiations were tough but friendly.
I just wanted to hit some of the major features It retains the cost factor model in its entirety, something that was important to a number of members of this body. The effective date moves to FY29. It establishes a new weighting system and also puts in place some significant additional study and analysis of the weights, and it develops a new system for primary residential property tax relief. We talk about the tax implications a lot in property taxes, but the real goal is for this bill to set us on what will be a long road to offering excellent educational opportunity for every Vermont child.
House members voted 96-45 to send the bill to the governor. Starksboro Democrat Herb Olson was among the lawmakers opposed to the bill.
I voted no on the question, despite several features relating to the foundation formula, which I find positive, at least in theory. But the bill will probably result in closing many smaller schools. Also, some districts will see a significant reduction in funding without any relief from state mandates and other expenses beyond that district's control. I know we can do better.
The House and Senate adjourned the session following comments from legislative leaders. House Speaker Jill Krowinski, a Democrat, told her chamber that they have responded to what Vermonters need and want.
We have answered Vermonters' call to make housing more affordable and easier to build. We answered Vermonters' call to improve our healthcare system. And we answered Vermonters' call to embark on the most significant education transformation we've seen in decades. Vermonters asked and we answered. We took up difficult bills and made them better. I am so proud that this House, across party lines and perspective, chose to govern together.
In his adjournment address to both chambers, Governor Phil Scott, a Republican, told legislators significant progress had been made on a number of key issues.
In January, I asked that we focus on 4 areas: public safety, affordability, housing, and education. And within these areas, you've made some meaningful progress. What we've accomplished over the last few months is important, but what comes next will be even more important. We cannot assume our many crises have been solved. I look forward to working with you into the next session to deliver the results our communities are calling for and Vermonters deserve.
No bills vetoed by the governor were taken up. The House and Senate will reconvene for the second half of the biennium on January 6, 2026. I'm Pat Bradley, WAMC News.
This has been The Best of Our Knowledge, episode 1811. The Best of Our Knowledge is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Thanks to associate producer Madeline Reynolds. The latest on all National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter and our flagship station's website, WAMC.org. Until next time, I'm Lucas Willard.